new encyclical by Pope Francis, Monday Musings. Some time ago, I would say new, although it's been a little while. It actually took me a while to make this video because I had to wait till I got on a little strange. I had to get an actual physical copy of this, and so it took a while for that copy to come, and then I had to actually read through it. But there was on October 3rd, which is the vigil of the Feast of St. Francis, Pope Francis promulgated a new encyclical letter called Fratelli Tutti, which means on fraternity and social friendship. And he composed this, he said, at the inspiration of St. Francis, and this title, Fratelli Tutti, actually comes from the admonitions of St. Francis, and it means all brothers. And when you look at this encyclical, it could basically almost seem to be an extended commentary on the parable of the Good Samaritan. The theme of the Good Samaritan goes all throughout the encyclical letter. And so, kind of interesting, a number of authors have pointed out now that Pope Francis has composed 3 encyclicals: The Light of Faith, Lumen Fidei, on Care for Our Common Home, Laudato Si, Fratelli Tutti, on Fraternity and Social Friendship, that there seems to be this building on each of the encyclicals. Lumen Fidei is about our relationship with God. Care for Our Common Home, Laudato Si, is about our relationship with the world, and now Fratelli Tutti seems to be about our relationship with each other. And so, kind of interesting, I found that, just because when sin entered the world, basically there was a rupture in our relationship with God. There was our relationship with God was broken, our relationship with the created world was broken, and our relationship with each other was obviously broken. And so, kind of interesting that Francis, is kind of almost seeming to go towards that fracturing that has happened, and trying to see how we can heal the wounds of our division with God, our division with the created world, and also our division with each other. It is basically a social political commentary, so, ever since Pope Leo the 13th in 1891, with the encyclical Rerum Novarum, there's obviously been a number of social political encyclical letters that have been composed, and so this would seem to be in that same realm. So it does deal with a lot of political issues and contemporary political, social issues that do affect the modern world. So he does take up issues like politics, and he does take up issues, more contemporary issues. He even talks about some contemporary issues like COVID, and he says how, because of COVID, if we are simply going to imagine that all we have to do is refine existing structures to create a better world once COVID has passed, he says obviously we would be denying reality. And he even talks about the economic collapse that happened in 2002, and how we never seriously addressed that, and because of that we never created a new economy that is so needed. I would say probably what I would see kind of as the central theme throughout this, and I'll just read, this is from chapter 6, the beginning of that. Says, approaching, speaking, listening, looking at, coming to know and understand one another, and to find common dialogue. All these things are summed up in one word: dialogue. If we want to encounter and help one another, we have to dialogue. Unlike disagreement and conflict, persistent and courageous dialogue does not make headlines, but quietly helps the world to live much better than we imagine. And so all throughout this, you are going to find the central theme of Pope Francis in this encyclical in particular is this idea of dialogue and encounter, and how if we want to create a better world, basically we have to dialogue and we have to encounter one another. And that means that to create this better world, that everyone has to be invited to the table, and everyone has a part to play in creating this better world. And he does spend a lot of time saying how, these decisions can't just be in the hands of the rich and the powerful, how everyone needs to come together to create this better, more sustainable world. That was Laudato Si. This better world, in particular when it comes to politics. And so he does, stress how important it is, and even those who are marginalized, the elderly, those who may have disabilities, whoever it is, all have to be part of this, creating of a better world. I would say probably if you want to, what I've found to be, if you just want to understand Pope Francis and where he comes from a little more, you could probably just read chapter 4, A Heart Open to the Whole World, which is focused mainly on migration, but it does involve some other issues also. And as he deals with this, he does say how that unnecessary migration going to other countries isn't something that should be encouraged. What should be encouraged more so is that conditions for a fully integrated life should begin in the cultures of origins where people have to flee from for one reason or another. And so he does spend some time in saying how, in this globalized world, we do have to, basically all countries have to, work together in order to, help each other build this better world, and it can't just be left to certain countries to do that. And he does kind of talk about how there has been this growing trend towards globalization. My phone's ringing if you hear that. There has been this growing trend towards globalization. He talks about how populist movements have happened recently that have seeming to have taken away from this globalized outlook, and he does say how that can be detrimental and not beneficial to our world today. And Pope Francis does mention how in this, he does say, while globalization is something important to create a better world in which we live, he certainly mentions that because of that, we shouldn't be looking to get rid of local cultures, and local cultures do bring something important that a globalized world can't have. So he is kind of not going towards this monolithic globalized economy or economic political world view, but he is trying to stress how we do have to, the world does need to come together to help build and promote a better world, but that also means respecting the localized traditions and customs that are part of every culture. And some of what has probably gained the most headlines is what he said on war and the death penalty. And he said there are two extreme situations that may come to be seen as solutions in especially dramatic circumstances, without realizing that they are false answers that do not resolve the problems they are meant to solve, and ultimately do no more than introduce new elements of destruction in the fabric of the national and global society. These are war and the death penalty. The Church more recently has come to what most say is a development of doctrine on the teaching of the death penalty, and Pope Francis does, and even the recent catechism, recent addition to the catechism that was made under the papacy of Pope Francis, does talk about how the death penalty in our contemporary climate is inadmissible because we do have other means than the death penalty, and so the Church does seem to have undergone some a development of doctrine in regards to the death penalty, and Pope Francis is very clear in calling for the abolition of the death penalty throughout the world. And so the Church has undergone that development of doctrine, not a rupture or change in teaching, but a development. And Pope John Paul was even very clear on that, saying how the death penalty in the modern world seems to be almost unnecessary. And so we see that development continuing with Pope Francis and what was included in the Catechism about the death penalty. And he also goes on to say how, this is kind of interesting and has I guess maybe cause some controversy, does talk about how war so often does create more problems than it does actually solve. So he doesn't say the Church has a tradition of which is part of the ordinary magisterium, not the extraordinary magisterium, does have a tradition of the death penalty, and so he doesn't outright say, calling for the abolition of that, but he does say that, we may be going in that direction. So kind of be interesting to see if, like how there was a development of doctrine, not a change of church teaching, but a development of doctrine with regards to the death penalty. Will be interesting to see maybe at some point in the future if we will have something similar when it comes to just war. Important to know these are development of doctrines, not changes of church teaching, so we wouldn't see something similar in regards to marriage, sexuality, all those issues that can be pressing, because that would be a change in church teaching. So just some Monday musings, probably not as clear as I wanted it to be, but just some Monday musings on this new encyclical letter by Pope Francis, and it probably wasn't clear because right before I started filming this, I dropped all my notes and they got all scattered, so I didn't have the actual basic format that I wanted to go through with it. So just some Monday musings on this new encyclical letter by Pope Francis. I will include, if you're watching on Instagram, you have to go to YouTube. I'll include a link of where you can get the whole encyclical at no cost, and a link if you want to purchase an actual copy of this. God bless.